I'll never forget the day I discovered everything. I was packing my suitcase for a business trip, a routine procedure I'd done countless times before, when something didn't feel right. As I gathered my clothes, my eyes wandered to the window and I noticed Kelly's car parked outside. That in itself wasn't bizarre. She had her own schedule and could be unpredictable. But it was too early. Kelly had always been punctual, leaving at exactly 7:50 a.m. for work without fail. Today, however, her car was there, hinting at an anomaly in our perfectly timed lives. I tried to brush off the uneasy feeling as mere fatigue from the morning rush, but then I noticed another detail. The front door was ajar. Our door had always been locked. Kelly was meticulous about our home's security, something she'd instilled in both of us. It was as if the usual protocols had been abandoned without explanation. A pungent, almost overpowering scent of expensive perfume filled the air, far stronger than I'd ever expected to catch in our usually neutral-smelling hallway. I knew that particular fragrance. It wasn't just any scent, but one that Kelly reserved for special occasions. Occasions that now made no sense. As I stood there, trying to piece together what could be happening, I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. At first, it was hard to distinguish, but as I focused, I realized it was a woman's voice. A voice that sounded familiar, yet somehow altered. Confusion and dread mixed in my gut. Something was very wrong, and the puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place in the most horrifying way. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step amplifying the thumping of my heart. Every creak of the wooden steps felt like an omen of what awaited me. When I reached the door of our bedroom, I hesitated, a momentary pause where my mind screamed for me to run, but curiosity and fear overcame me. Throwing the door open, I found myself staring at a scene that shattered my world in an instant. There, on our rumpled bed, was Kelly, my Kelly, with a man I had never expected to see. Not just any man, but a police officer, his uniform disheveled, his body half-clad as if he'd rushed in without a second thought. The shock of it hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I was frozen, unable to move or speak, my mind grappling with disbelief and betrayal. My heart pounded in my chest as my eyes darted between them. Kelly's expression was one of startled surprise, and I could see a mixture of guilt and defiance flashing in her eyes. The officer, too, seemed caught off guard, his posture rigid and defensive. I stood there, the scene unraveling in a series of disjointed, surreal moments. Questions flooded my mind. Had I been living a lie? Was everything I thought I knew about us crumbling away? I remember feeling an overwhelming mix of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, anger, and a deep, gnawing sadness. The trust that I had placed in Kelly, built over years of shared experiences and promises, now lay in ruins. In that split second, my world transformed from a picture of suburban perfection into a chaotic mess of shattered illusions. I struggled to find my voice, the words caught in my throat as the full impact of what I had witnessed sank in. There, in our sacred space, the intimate sanctuary we'd built together, the truth was laid bare. I felt like an intruder in my own home, witnessing a betrayal that I never saw coming. Every rational thought was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. That day marked the beginning of a journey I never wanted to embark on. A journey through heartbreak, confusion, and a maze of secrets that would ultimately redefine everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. As I stood there, feeling the weight of the betrayal crush my spirit, I realized that the life I had built was now hanging by a fragile thread, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a reality that was far more complicated and painful than any business trip could ever be. I've spent countless sleepless nights since that day, grappling with the raw emotions and endless questions that seemed to have no answers. And though I'm still trying to navigate the aftermath, one thing is clear. Nothing is ever truly black and white, and sometimes the most shocking truths lie hidden behind the facades we all wear. I stood there, still reeling from the shock of what I just witnessed, when David, clearly in a state of panic, began scrambling to get dressed. His movements were hurried and clumsy, as if he'd been caught off guard by his own betrayal. I could see the way he fumbled with his uniform, his hands trembling as he tried to gather his scattered belongings. It was as if, in that moment, all the authority he usually exuded evaporated into thin air. Kelly's reaction, however, was far more disturbing. Instead of a tearful apology or a look of regret, she met my eyes with a defiant expression and blurted out, "It's not what you think." Those 4 words, so carelessly thrown at a moment of absolute crisis, echoed around the room like an absurd mantra. I felt a surge of anger rising inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm enough to process the betrayal unfolding before me. "Not what I think," I managed to say, my voice quiet but edged with an intensity that belied the fury burning within. "Then what is it, Kelly? Explain this, please." I tried to maintain a measured tone, hoping to get some semblance of truth out of her. But instead of answering, she launched into a convoluted justification. "The last 4 months haven't been like this," she insisted, as if the recent history of our relationship could somehow negate the gravity of the moment. It was a flimsy attempt to rewrite the narrative, as if we'd suddenly stepped into an alternate timeline where loyalty and honesty were mere suggestions rather than cornerstones of our bond. Meanwhile, David had finished dressing, his face now a mask of forced composure. I noticed his badge and gun, both lying carelessly on the nightstand. A silent, damning testament to the power dynamics that had shifted in our bedroom that morning. It was as if David, even in his compromised state, still clung to the remnants of authority he was meant to represent. But there was no authority left here. Only betrayal, confusion, and a bitter cocktail of emotions swirling in the air. I took a deep breath, my mind racing through the fragmented thoughts of betrayal and manipulation, and turned my attention to David. "David?" I said calmly, my voice steady and devoid of the rage I felt. "I need you to leave." There was no room for more of this farce in my life. The calm in my tone wasn't an absence of anger. It was a deliberate choice, a way to reclaim some control in a situation that had spiraled wildly out of control. Without another word, David didn't hesitate. He hurried out of the room, his departure marked by the quiet, echoing sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. His exit, although abrupt, was a small mercy in an already unbearable scenario. But Kelly wasn't finished yet. Even as the dust settled, she seized the opportunity to twist the narrative. "You're overreacting," she said, her tone shifting to one of feigned innocence and subtle manipulation. "Maybe you're just tired from your trip, or perhaps you're letting your imagination run wild." Her words dripped with a calculated calm, as if she were trying to convince me that the entire debacle was nothing more than a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation on my part. I could see the effort in her eyes to turn the tables, to paint me as the guilty party in this debacle. It was as if she expected my shock to somehow morph into confusion, to let me doubt the reality of what I just witnessed. "Are you seriously trying to make me out to be the bad guy here?" I asked, my voice quiet but heavy with disbelief. "You expect me to believe that everything is perfectly normal? That I'm somehow responsible for what's happening in our home?" Her response was a feeble attempt to downplay the gravity of her actions. "Lucas, you have to understand," she pleaded, stepping closer, her voice low and almost hypnotic in its insistence. "Things have been different lately. I didn't want to hurt you, but sometimes you make me do things you don't understand." Her words struck me like a slap in the face. I had spent years building trust, nurturing a partnership based on mutual respect, and now she was trying to rewrite the script of our life in a way that absolved her of responsibility while somehow implicating me. The audacity was overwhelming. For a brief moment, I considered staying, listening to her tangled web of justifications, but the betrayal was too deep, the hurt too raw. I took a step back, feeling the weight of every false promise and every secret that had led to this moment. "I'm done listening," I said, my voice resolute. "I won't let you twist this situation any further." I turned, the decision crystallizing in that instant. There was no going back to the way things were, no mending of a bond that had been so irreparably broken. Without a backward glance, I left the room, each step away from that scene feeling like a reclaiming of my own sanity and dignity. The door closed behind me with a soft click, a final punctuation mark to a chapter of my life that I could no longer bear to live in. As I walked away, a mixture of sorrow and a newfound determination settled over me. I was determined to find the truth, no matter how twisted and painful it might be, and to rebuild my life on foundations that were honest and real. I didn't even know where I was headed when I threw myself into the car that morning. The drive was chaotic, my mind a jumble of betrayal and raw anger, and the steering wheel an indifferent confidant to my despair. I left without any plan, no destination in mind, just a desperate need to escape the suffocating scene I had just left behind. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement offered little comfort as I sped away, trying to outrun the ghosts of what I had witnessed. My phone began to ring incessantly, an insistent, digital reminder that I couldn't escape my past so easily. Every time I glanced at the screen, there was a message from Kelly. Her texts, laced with threats and venom, cut through the silence of the car like shards of glass. One message in particular seared itself into my mind. "If you don't come back, I'll make you regret it." Those words echoed in the back of my mind with every mile I covered, each ring a reminder that the ties I thought were severed were now morphing into dangerous traps. I eventually pulled over at a deserted roadside cafe, a temporary refuge amid the blur of passing landscapes. The cafe, with its faded neon sign and worn-out furniture, felt like the perfect pit stop for someone who had lost his way. The isolation of the place was a stark contrast to the chaotic urban life I just escaped, and for a fleeting moment, it allowed me to collect my thoughts. As I sat there, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and wrestling with my thoughts, a name emerged from the fog of memory. Tom. Once, he had been my best friend, someone I trusted with my secrets, my triumphs, and my defeats. It had been 6 years since we last spoke. 6 years filled with misunderstandings and silence that I had never fully understood. But in that lonely, rain-speckled moment at the cafe, Tom's memory burned brighter than ever. I pulled out my phone and hesitated, unsure if a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in so long would even be welcomed. With a deep, shaky breath, I dialed his number. My heart pounded as I awaited an answer, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. Finally, the line clicked. Tom's familiar voice came through, laced with an urgency I hadn't heard in years. "Lucas? What happened?" he asked immediately, his tone heavy with concern as if he'd sensed the distress in my voice before I could even fully articulate it. I struggled to find the right words amidst the whirlwind of emotions. I gave him a brief rundown of the situation, a rushed explanation of a scene so surreal it felt like a bad dream. I told him about the unlocked door, the scent of expensive perfume, the horrifying sight of Kelly in bed with David, the frantic confrontation that followed, and my desperate escape. I left out nothing, though the pain in my voice was unmistakable. Without a beat of hesitation, Tom said, "Wait there. I'm leaving now." There was a resolute strength in his tone that made me feel a glimmer of hope. Even after all these years, despite the silence and distance, Tom's loyalty shone through. It was as if no amount of time could erode the bond we once had, and I was thankful for that amid the wreckage of my life. Time seemed to dilate as I sat alone in the cafe, anxiously watching the door every few minutes. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one loaded with anticipation and the distant hum of the approaching storm outside. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another venomous text from Kelly, but also silently praying for Tom's arrival. 50 minutes later, just as I was beginning to think that maybe I had been abandoned once more by fate, I saw him. Tom was standing outside the cafe, his silhouette framed by the dull glow of the streetlights. He looked exactly as I remembered. Older, perhaps a little wearier, but with the same steadfast eyes that once told me everything was going to be okay. We exchanged a brief, wordless nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared pain and the unspoken promise of support. Without wasting another moment, I gathered my scattered belongings, and Tom climbed into the passenger seat beside me. There was a surreal comfort in his presence, a silent understanding that even if the world around me was crumbling, I wasn't alone in facing it. As we drove away from the roadside cafe, The road ahead stretched out like an uncertain path to redemption. The city lights faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet solitude of the countryside. The radio played a soft, melancholic tune that somehow resonated with the chaos of my emotions. I couldn't help but wonder how life had taken such a cruel turn. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. It was all too much to bear. Yet, in that moment, with Tom by my side, I felt a spark of determination. Tom broke the silence, his voice steady and reassuring. "Lucas, we're gonna figure this out. I'm not going to let you face this alone." His words, simple yet powerful, reverberated through the car and through the tangled corridors of my mind. I glanced at him, a mix of gratitude and sorrow swirling in my eyes. There were so many questions. Why did Kelly do this? What did she mean by "the last 4 months haven't been like this"? And how could everything I thought I knew about our life together crumble so effortlessly? But for now, those questions could wait. I needed to get to a place where I could think clearly, away from the chaos of the present. Driving toward my house, a place that now felt more like a monument to broken trust than a home. I felt the weight of every past memory colliding with the harsh reality of the present. Yet, the unexpected arrival of Tom reminded me that perhaps some bonds were too deep to be severed by betrayal alone. His support was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, genuine friendship could shine through. I didn't know what awaited me at home, or what twists the future held, but as Tom's steady presence anchored me to a semblance of sanity, I vowed to uncover the truth behind the tangled web of deception. The journey ahead was bound to be fraught with painful revelations and unexpected turns, but I was no longer alone, and sometimes that small bit of hope was enough to keep moving forward. The drive back home was quieter than before, the silence in the car filled with an unspoken realization that everything had changed. Tom's presence, always a steady anchor amid my tumultuous thoughts, gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in days. As we neared my old neighborhood, Tom broke the silence with a statement that cut through the fog of confusion. "Lucas, you can't go back to Kelly. Not after everything that's happened." His words, firm and unwavering, resonated deep within me. At first, I tried to resist the idea. For years, Kelly had been my world, and even though I felt the sting of betrayal with every fiber of my being, the thought of dissolving the life we built together made my heart ache. But as we drove on, the weight of our recent experiences began to settle. I recalled every moment of that morning, the shattered trust, the twisted justifications, and a harsh truth emerged. Returning to Kelly was no longer an option. "Divorce?" I muttered, more to myself than to Tom. The word felt heavy, like a final verdict on a love that had once promised everything. Tom's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, filled with a mixture of concern and determination. "It's the only way out, Lucas. You deserve to move on without this constant storm of manipulation and betrayal." His voice was calm yet insistent, urging me to take a step I had been avoiding out of fear and lingering hope that things might somehow be salvaged. Once I admitted to myself that leaving Kelly was the only path toward healing, the next steps felt almost inevitable. Tom suggested we visit Rebecca Williams, a seasoned family lawyer known for her no-nonsense approach and 17 years of experience in handling divorce cases. I hesitated at the idea of legal battles and the unraveling of shared memories, but deep down, I knew it was necessary. If I was to reclaim my life, I needed to confront the mess head-on. We arrived at Rebecca's modest office in a downtown building that exuded an air of efficiency. Her warm but professional demeanor immediately put me at ease, and she wasted no time getting down to business. "Lucas," she began, her voice steady, "the key here is to file for divorce first. That gives you the upper hand." I listened intently as she explained how our shared home complicated the matter. Returning and staying in that house, she emphasized, would actually work in my favor. The familiarity of the space, combined with the fact that Kelly would now have to contend with her own actions in a home filled with memories, could provide me with the leverage I needed. Rebecca laid out the plan clearly. "The sooner we act, the less likely it is that Kelly will cause further problems. Emotions run high in these situations, and the longer you wait, the more complicated things can become. Each word was a small dose of clarity, slicing away at the fog of indecision that had paralyzed me since that fateful day. I realized that in order to move forward, I had to dismantle the very foundation of our shared life, even if that meant confronting the painful details of the past head-on. As we discussed the logistics, I felt a shift inside me. A transformation from someone who clung to the remnants of a crumbling relationship to someone ready to claim a future free from deceit. Rebecca's calm, practical advice was like a lifeline. "It's important to file promptly," she reiterated. "Holding on to this home, this life, only gives her more room to manipulate the narrative. Once the papers are signed, the process officially begins, and you'll have taken the first crucial step towards a new chapter." With Tom's supportive presence by my side and Rebecca's expert guidance, the decision no longer felt like a surrender, but rather a reclaiming of my own dignity and self-worth. I took a deep breath, glancing at Tom, whose nod of encouragement was all the reassurance I needed. In that moment, I signed the papers. The scratch of my pen on the document echoed in the quiet office, marking the point of no return. It was surreal, the finality of that signature. In that instant, I was no longer bound by the ties that had once seemed so unbreakable. The process of divorce had officially begun, and with it, the painful yet necessary journey towards rebuilding my life. The papers symbolized not just an end, but a cautious promise of a new beginning, free from the constraints of betrayal and manipulation. Driving away from Rebecca's office later that day, I felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and sorrow. I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I also understood that this decision was the only way to reclaim the person I had lost along the way. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, now represented the battleground of our broken trust. A battleground I was finally ready to leave behind. I posted about this experience here on Reddit, sharing my journey in the hope that someone out there might find solace in knowing they're not alone. Has anyone else ever taken the painful step of ending a long-term relationship, only to discover that it was the first real step towards rediscovering themselves? What did your journey towards healing look like? And how did you find the courage to start over? I knew I couldn't leave my past completely behind until I faced it one last time, so I made the decision to go back home and collect my things. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was left of my life. It was about taking final control, putting an end to the manipulation that had seeped into every corner of our shared space. Tom insisted on coming along. "You're not doing this alone," he said, his tone firm as we drove back together. He knew, as I did, that Kelly might try to twist this reunion into yet another emotional trap, and he wasn't willing to let that happen. When we pulled into the driveway, a sense of foreboding hit me immediately. The front door was unlocked again, like a stage set for the chaos that I knew was waiting inside. As we stepped into the house, the scene that greeted us was nothing short of surreal. My belongings were scattered across the floor, as if someone had stormed through in a fit of rage or recklessness. The rooms, once filled with memories of our happier times, now felt hollow, stripped of the warmth and order I had once known. It didn't take long for my heart to sink even further when I noticed that every photo of us, every captured moment of a life we'd once cherished, had vanished. The frames that had proudly hung on the walls were gone, wiped clean, leaving no trace of the past that I'd clung to for so long. The silence in the house was loud, filled with unspoken words and the echoes of what had been lost. Then, out of nowhere, I heard her. Kelly stood in the doorway of what used to be our living room, a smile playing on her lips, a smile so full of sarcasm it was almost a challenge. "Oh, look who's back," she chirped, her tone light but laced with venom. I felt my anger rise, but I forced myself not to engage. I couldn't let her bait me into a conversation that I had no interest in having. I began to methodically gather my things, carefully picking up books, clothes, and other mementos from the floor. Every step I took was deliberate. Each item packed a silent protest against the betrayal that had shattered our lives. Kelly, clearly unprepared for my calm determination, couldn't hide her irritation. "You act like I killed you," she snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. Her accusation was meant to belittle my pain, to twist the narrative of our demise into something that made me seem weak and unresponsive. I paused only for a moment before my voice, raw but steady, cut through the charged silence. You betrayed me. This is worse. There was no elaboration, no need to rehash every moment of deceit that had led us here. The words hung in the air like a final indictment, a statement that was both an end and a beginning. It was clear that the house, the memories, and the remnants of what we once had were no longer places where I belonged. As I continued to pack up my things, I couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of finality. Each item I put into my bag symbolized a piece of my former life, a life I now recognized as a carefully constructed illusion, shattered by lies and manipulation. Tom stayed close by, his presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't alone in this final act of reclaiming my identity. Kelly tried one last time to regain control of the situation, her tone shifting between feigned sorrow and bitter sarcasm. So, are you really leaving everything behind? Isn't it like you're erasing us? But her words fell on deaf ears. I wasn't interested in arguing, in revisiting the past with someone who had long abandoned any semblance of honesty. Every word she uttered was just another reminder of the betrayal I had endured, and I had already made up my mind. With nothing more to salvage, I walked out of the house for the last time. The door closed behind me with a soft click that resonated like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I looked back just once, not out of hesitation, but to mark the end of a chapter that had been as toxic as it was painful. In that final glance, I saw a reflection of everything I was leaving behind. The chaos, the lies, the empty smiles. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to fight for. Driving away from that house felt surreal, like emerging from a long, suffocating nightmare into a world that was raw and unfiltered. I knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of grief over the lost memories and the betrayal that cut so deeply. But I also knew that I was free from the manipulations, free from the constant cycle of guilt and blame. In that freedom, however painful it might be at first, lay the promise of a future where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. I woke up in a new life, one that I'd scarcely believed possible only a few short days ago. Tom's guest room had become my temporary sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe. Even though exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, I felt an unfamiliar sense of relief coursing through my veins. It was as if, in leaving behind the chaos of my old home and the bitter memories that haunted it, I'd managed to reclaim a part of myself I'd long thought was lost. Over the next few days, I set out to clean up not just my physical surroundings, but the remnants of my past that still lingered in the digital and tangible corners of my life. I began by discarding the engagement ring, a symbol of promises and dreams that now felt like a relic of a life built on lies. I tossed it into a small, unmarked box, and then, with a deep, cathartic breath, I threw the box away, as if ridding myself of one last connection to Kelly. I wasn't done there. I deleted every message from her, the texts that once meant love but had morphed into venomous reminders of betrayal. I scrolled through my phone and painstakingly removed every photo of us, each one a frozen moment that now only brought pain. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. With every file deleted, it felt as though I was clearing space for a new future, one where I could define my own narrative without being haunted by someone else's shadow. That night, for the first time in several years, I slept peacefully. I don't mean that I woke up without memories or regrets. Those would always be a part of me, but I slept soundly, with a mind free of the constant churning of anger and hurt. I woke with a clarity that had eluded me for far too long. Yet, as the sun crept through the blinds, my phone buzzed with a new message from Kelly. My heart skipped a beat as I read her words. "We need to talk about the house." I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. A part of me knew that this wasn't the end, that Kelly would always try to insert herself into the pieces of my life she once controlled. But I was done with her manipulations. I took a deep breath and chose to ignore the message, knowing that engaging with her would only drag me back into a past I was determined to leave behind. Tom, ever the pillar of support, suggested we return to Rebecca's office to speed up the eviction process for Kelly from the house. Even though it was a painful step, it was necessary. a final legal closure to the tumultuous chapter we'd been forced to endure. When we arrived, Rebecca's calm demeanor reminded me that sometimes the hardest parts of moving forward are the ones that require us to confront what we'd rather forget. She assured me that by initiating the eviction process now, we could prevent any future disruptions and finally sever the ties that had bound me to that life. 9 days later, a formal notice of divorce was served to Kelly. Holding the document in my hand felt surreal, a final punctuation mark on a story that had once defined my entire existence. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the tangible evidence of my newfound freedom. I realized that the process of healing wasn't a straight path. There would be moments of doubt, unexpected texts, and lingering questions about what might have been. But each step I took toward a life free from Kelly's influence was a step toward reclaiming who I truly was. I often think about that period as both an ending and a beginning. The eviction notice, the legal finality of the divorce, the physical act of discarding every painful memento. It was all a part of a necessary catharsis. I was learning that sometimes you have to let go completely to make room for something new, something genuine. And while Kelly's message about the house hinted at unresolved conflicts, it no longer held power over me. I had taken control of my life, piece by piece, and I was determined to build a future that was honest and self-defined. In the quiet mornings that followed, I found solace in the small routines that now belonged solely to me. A cup of coffee on the porch, a walk in the park, and conversations with Tom about life and the uncertainties of the future. All these moments were steps toward rediscovering a self I'd nearly lost in the whirlwind of deceit and manipulation. This journey has been anything but easy. It's been riddled with pain, unexpected twists, and the constant reminder that freedom often comes at the highest of prices. But as I sit here now, looking forward to a future filled with promise rather than regret, I know that I made the right choice. The road ahead is uncharted, and though Kelly's shadow may occasionally flicker in the back of my mind, I'm no longer defined by it. Returning to the house felt like stepping onto a freshly cleared canvas, a space I was finally ready to claim as my own. I had spent weeks untangling my life from Kelly's manipulations, and now it was time to make one final, irrevocable move. I drove back to the house with a sense of quiet determination, knowing that this was the moment to secure my ownership once and for all. When I arrived, I found Kelly waiting in the doorway, as if she had been expecting me. Her eyes lit up with that familiar, mischievous glimmer as she sauntered over, attempting to mask her anxiety with flirtation. "I knew you'd come back," she purred, stepping a little too close. "Maybe we can work this out. Think about it, Lucas. You know deep down you're missing what we had." But I wasn't interested in any more of her games. The trust and love that had once defined our relationship were long gone, replaced by a stark awareness of the freedom I was beginning to feel. Before I could reply, she tried to pivot, using every trick in her arsenal of manipulation. "You'll never find someone better than me," she insisted, her voice layered with desperation and arrogance. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, light laugh that startled even me. "It's better to be alone than with you," I said, the words ringing out clear and final. In that moment, something shifted deep inside me. The weight of years filled with betrayal and manipulation lifted, replaced by an exhilarating sense of liberation. I realized I was no longer tethered to a past that had held me back. I was free, truly free for the first time in a long time. With a decisive nod, I set to work reclaiming every inch of the space that had once been tainted by our shared memories. I began by removing every trace of Kelly's presence. I went room by room, discarding her belongings that still lingered, mementos that had once held significance but now were just remnants of a manipulated past. I replaced the old furniture with new pieces that resonated with my current self, a reflection of who I was and who I was determined to become. The transformation was not merely physical. With each item I tossed out, I felt layers of emotional baggage peeling away, revealing a part of me I had almost forgotten existed. The house, once a battleground of shared memories and painful reminders, began to take on a new character. It was no longer our space, it was mine. Every room echoed with the promise of a fresh start, every empty wall an invitation to rebuild my identity on my own terms. As I arranged the new furniture, I paused to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. For the first time in 5 years, I felt that my life truly belonged to me. No longer was I shackled by the past or tethered to someone who had repeatedly undermined my sense of self. I was the one in control, and the future was mine to shape. With the final adjustments made, I sat on the newly arranged couch, a quiet smile playing on my lips as I surveyed the space. I felt an overwhelming surge of hope and excitement about what lay ahead. I started planning my next steps, exploring opportunities that had always been at the back of my mind but now seemed within reach. I began jotting down ideas in a notebook, a tangible representation of my new beginning. There was work to be done, dreams to chase, and a life to live that was authentically mine. I posted here on Reddit about this momentous shift in my life, hoping that my story might inspire anyone who finds themselves caught in a web of toxic relationships. Have you ever reached a point where you realized that reclaiming your space, both physically and emotionally, was the first step toward true freedom? How did you manage to break free and start anew, knowing that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but also the promise of a future that belongs solely to you?